Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. The noon sun in Silver Gulch didn't just shine. It hammered. It beat on the plank roofs and warped the town's signboards until the letters bowed like tired men. Heat shivered off the packed clay of Main Street, and every breath tasted of grit. The mercantile's bell gave an exhausted clink as someone slipped inside for shade. Flies bothered the horses tied along the rail, and the horses flicked their tails with the same bored impatience as the men leaning under the overhangs. Gathered because there was nothing better to do, and because cruelty, when sold as entertainment, drew a crowd as sure as a card table. The sheriff's office had pushed a flatbed wagon out front, and on it stood a man with his wrists cupped in iron. He was barefoot. Blood had dried around the shackles like a rust of its own, and his shirt had torn along one shoulder to bare, a muscled curve browned by the prairie. His hair hung in black ropes to his chest, dust-streaked, but clean in the way a storm is clean untamed, resisting the town's grime by the sheer fact of not belonging here. Savage, someone said. Close by, the word a hawked seed meant to stick and sprout. Mean as a badger. Another agreed dot. The man on the wagon stared past them, past the sheriff, past the church spire, to some line on the horizon only he could see. His eyes were black glass sharp, assessing, not pleading. If he was afraid, it lived deep, private. Where no one could touch it. Sheriff Amos Hartbroad, as a door and pinked from drink, thumped the wagon rail with a baton. "Quiet up," he called. "Quiet, I said. We're conducting lawful business here. Lawful business." Silver Gulch had a way of pinning law to things that looked like its opposite. The handbill posted that morning read, "Work detail for sale." The letters were neat. The edges of the paper curled like an old leaf. "Caught him 2 days south," Deputy Creed announced, rocking back on his heels as if he'd done something clever. "Scouting our herds. Might have been fixing to raid. Mighta. Been fixing to drink water." An old ranch hand muttered and spat. No one listened. The sheriff raised his hand, and the crowd hushed because they were practiced at this, at hushing for the moment when money changed hands and people pretended it was normal to trade a man like a mule. "This one'll work," Sheriff Hart declared. "Take it from me. He'll haul timber, mend fence, break broncs. He'll do it under watch. Who'll start the bid at $30? A murmur rippled calculations, moral and otherwise. 20, a freckled teamster called, his lip curling. "He eats, don't he?" 20's fair for a savage. 25 came from a rancher who never parted with cash unless it came back doubled. The man on the wagon didn't look at either. A fly landed on his cheek and crawled toward his eye. He blinked it away with the same patience he used to weather the heat. 3 boys had climbed the trough rails for a better view. They whispered, the way boys will, forming truths they'd carry like stones. On the far side of the street, a woman stepped out from the shade of the livery. She paused just long enough to push a stray dark strand under her hat brim, and to take the scene in, not the spectacle, but the details. Her eyes were workmen's eyes. They measured, they weighed, they subtracted waste. She was in a split skirt, dust-stained boots, sleeves rolled despite the sun. A widow, folks whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Clara Dawson, the one holding her dead husband's ranch like a bedraggled flag. The same folks who tried to buy her out last winter now watched with the attendance of vultures who like to know when a thing will fall. Clara moved as if the street belonged to her, despite the way men's chatter snagged on her like barbs. She'd been running cattle alone long enough to learn how to take up space without apology. The sweat at the hollow of her throat made a small dark triangle in her cotton shirt. She stopped at the edge of the crowd and shifted her jaw, considering the wagon, the sheriff, the iron, the sun. 28, a thin man offered, quick and sly, as if he'd found a deal in a barrel, with a false bottom. Deputy Creed lifted the baton like a gavel. "We've got 40, Clara said. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of voice that cuts through, because it expects to be heard. Heads turned, then bodies, then the entire day seemed to pivot on the hinge of her words. A few men laughed, short and surprised. Sheriff Hart squinted. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, adjusting his hat as if respect were something you could angle. "You mean 40 cents more, I assume." $40, she repeated, in cash. A preacher's wife clutched her parasol closer, scandal tightening her mouth. "A woman bidding on such as that? Reckon she needs help mending fence," someone stage whispered. "Reckon she needs help mending her head," someone else hissed, and laughter scattered like birdshot. Clara didn't spare them a glance. She looked at the man on the wagon up, into his eyes, and let him see that she wasn't gawking. She nodded once, a greeting. The small muscles at the corners of his eyes flickered. It wasn't a response exactly, but it wasn't nothing. He watched her with the attentiveness of a hunter who wants to know which way the wind will carry a spark. Sheriff wet his lips. The town liked him best when he played loud and certain, but Clara had a way of squeezing the bravado out of men, who wore it like a borrowed vest. 40, he repeated, trying the number on for fit. "Do I hear 45? The rancher who'd said 25 shifted, weighing pride against the risk of being stuck with more labor than he wanted. He lifted a hand half an inch and then dropped it as if it burned him. No one else raised the bid. 40 was a lot of money to spend on a man you didn't see as one. "Sold," Deputy Creed said too fast, eager to be done, baton thumping the air. Rail. Clara made the exchange in the shade of the sheriff's doorway, the clink of coins, the scratch of a pen on a form that pretended to be cleaner than it was. Sheriff Hart peered at her signature and blew on the ink, though it was already dry. "Terms is simple," he said. "You're responsible for his keep and his conduct. He don't leave your property without escort. You feed him, you house him, you put him to work. If he runs, you forfeit the fee, and his labor returns to the county." "County," Clara said, and a small smile touched one corner of her mouth. "That what we're calling it today?" The sheriff's color deepened. "It's the law." Clara tucked the receipt into an inside pocket. "Then it will suit the law to hear my terms. He works sunrise to sunset. He eats what I eat. You return the bond at season's end if I say he's done his part. That's what we're agreeing to." "You don't set terms to the law," Creed snapped. "The law sets terms to you." Clara turned to him with the patient stillness she used on skittish colts. "Deputy, the law doesn't mend fence when a storm takes half the south line. The law doesn't help me pull a calving heifer out of the brush at 3 in the morning. I'm telling you how it will be if you want me to put my name to this. Or you can put him back on that wagon and start over with your crowd." Creed's mouth worked. Sheriff Hart, who knew a losing hand when he felt it, tugged at his collar and pretended the heat had suddenly become unbearable. "We'll note your preferences," he said. "Town expects decent conduct." "Town expects a lot," Clara said. "Doesn't always pay for it." While they argued, a pair of boys crept up to the wagon. One jabbed a stick at the prisoner's calf, quick and testing, like a dog daring a bigger animal. The man didn't flinch. He turned his head and looked at them, not angry, not pleading, just looked. A boy's faces altered in the slow way wet clay shifts under a thumb. They backed away, not in fear, but in the half-embarrassed understanding that they had been seen and measured, and found small Clara stepped out again as the sheriff tucked away his copy of the paper. "I'll take him," she said. "I brought a halter." She had looped over her shoulder-braided rawhide she used for colts, the leather oiled and soft. When she climbed the wagon steps, the boards creaked. Up close, he smelled of smoke. and sage and something wilder, the way high country smells when you step off the trail. There was dried blood at his hairline. She took a clean kerchief from her pocket, and without touching him, offered it as one might offer water to a wounded. Hawk. He looked at it, then at her face. His wrists tilted, chains murmuring. Carefully, he took the cloth. He dabbed at the blood like a man meeting dignity after a long absence. "I won't put this on you if I can help it," she said of the halter. "But they'll want to show when we walk." He understood that. His jaw flexed once, slow, not in submission, but in agreement to a necessary indignity. She handed one end to Deputy Creed, who took it with the petty triumph of a child finally given a toy. Clara stepped down and stood beside the wagon, as if to shorten the distance he'd have to travel through the gauntlet. When the deputy unlocked the irons from the hitch and jerked the chain to hurry him, she said in a tone she might use to correct a ranch hand, "Don't you pull him like that. He walks, you follow." He did. Bare feet found the wagon rail, then the wheel rim, then ground so hot the air above it wavered. He didn't wince. He didn't give them anything. The crowd parted, some with fascination, some with disgust, some with the wary respect people give to a thing they cannot break. A woman murmured a prayer. The preacher himself frowned, undecided, whether to condemn the violence or the breach of his congregation's comfort. "Clara, for the love of," called a voice, thin with worry. Mrs. Ellery, who taught the town's letters in her front parlor and had mended Clara's hand when a wire sliced it to the bone one spring. She stood now, bonnet askew, hands tight, on her reticule. "What are you doing?" Clara didn't slow. "Buying help," she said. "You could hire boys," Mrs. Ellery said, voice dropping. "White boys. Or, well—" She stopped. The rest of the sentence tangled at her throat. Clara hitched a shoulder. "Boys don't stay. Boys get scared of weather and of work. This one will stay. He has to. And I will see he is treated human." Human. The word landed solid as a stone in the dust. It had weight. Some people felt it like a challenge. Others felt it like relief. A rangy man in a black vest pushed off a post as they passed. He was one of the Granger boys, though he wore no badge to say it. His smile was all stretched hide and new teeth. "Careful, Mrs. Dawson," he drawled. "Savages got a way of running wild. Like mustangs, pretty till they kick your skull." Clara's gaze slid to him, flat as a skillet. "Mustangs are smart," she said. "They kick what tries to break them." The man's grin thinned. His hand drifted near the butt of his revolver in a casual, not casual way that meant, "I could." Deputy Creed puffed up, eager to show posture in front of the Grangers, but Sheriff Hart barked his name, and the deputy stilled, surprised by the sharpness. Hart didn't look at Clara. His warning was for the outlaw. "There'll be no trouble on my street. For now," the Granger said, and sauntered off, his spurs whispering threats. They reached Clara's wagon at the end of the street, where the shade of the cottonwoods gathered like the relief of a drink. Her mare, Lark, snorted and stamped. Curious. Clara set a foot on the spoke and swung up onto the high bench. She held the halter's lead herself, not tight, not slack, a visible tether for the town to feel appeased by. "Climb up," she told the man. He didn't at first. He studied the bench, the horses, the road out of town, and the ring of faces pretending not to be a trap. He stepped onto the wheel with the slow, contained power of a man who knows his body is being counted on. He sat. The iron at his wrists made small, urgent sounds, like insects. His gaze slid to the reins in her hands, then to her boots on the floorboard, and back to her face. "You'll have water at the creek," she said, matter of fact. "Food at the house. I've fences going down and calves getting into mischief." She tipped her hat back enough to meet his eyes. You do not owe me gratitude. You owe me work and your word to stay until the term is done. In return, I owe you fair treatment. That's the shape of it." He watched her the way a wild thing watches the first hand that does not carry a weapon. If he had words, he kept them. If he had a name, he kept that too. She didn't reach for either dock. Clara flicked the reins, and Lark stepped forward. The wagon creaked into motion. As they left the press of buildings, and the air cooled a fraction in the open, a wind came nosing down from the hills with the smell of pine caught in its fingers. Behind them, the town closed in around its gossip like a wound scabbing over ugly. Now, sure to itch later, they rattled past the last hitching post, past the churchyard with its fence leaning like old men conferring. The road out ran straight for a while, and then bent toward the creek, where cottonwoods dipped toes into trickling water the color of tin. They didn't speak. The quiet between them wasn't easy. Exactly. But it wasn't hostile. It was the quiet of two people adding up a ledger. Debts on one side, hopes kept small on the other, so the balance wouldn't topple. Clara let her eyes go soft on the distance and took stock. South fence, down by 3 spans. East pasture, coyote sign near the arroyo. The well, running slower needs scraping. The roof, one more storm will peel it like an orange, unless she reins it in with fresh nails. She kept her mind moving because, if it stopped, it would have time to remember last winter's fever and the way her husband's breath had rattled out and not back in. It would have time to remember the offers made at the funeral, polite, predatory, with a gloss of sympathy like varnish over rot. "Sell, Mrs. Dawson," they'd said. "It's no work for a lady." She'd smiled a smile that had nothing. "Pretty in it. No work is for a lady," she'd replied. "Work is for people who can do it." A hawk wrote slow hieroglyphs in the sky with its wings. Lark's ears twitched at the buzz of a deer flea. The wagon wheels found their old ruts and hummed the familiar complaint of weight and wood. "Do you understand me?" Clara asked finally, not turning her head. About the term, about the work. After a long moment, she heard his answer. Not the content, a single low syllable could have meant yes, or simply that he heard, but the sound of it, rough, unused lately, shaped by a tongue that had other words for wind and law and distance than hers did. The sound did something strange to the tight place under her breastbone. She exhaled slowly through her nose, like easing a cinch. "You'll keep the irons," she said. The words tasted like something she wanted to spit, and she didn't hide that. For now. For town's sake, not mine. When we're past the creek, and on my land, we'll talk about them. He turned his head then and looked at her not as a captor or a savior, but as a person whose choices meant something. He nodded once, the smallest of treaties. They crossed the creek, and the air cooled a little more. Lark lowered her head to drink from the moving water, and Clara let her. The man on the bench leaned forward, as if he might leap into the shade and disappear. He didn't. He watched the current. He watched the leaves. He blinked into the dappling, and in that flicker, Clara saw him without the town's glare on him, saw how the set of his mouth loosened, how the skin at his throat softened. He was what was the word? Tired, not weak, not beaten, just a long way from where he ought to be. They rolled on. The ranch rose from the valley like a stubborn thought that refused to be corrected. A low house with a pitched roof patched in 3 colors, a barn tacked together from mismatched boards, a corral whose gate swung true only if you coaxed it, not bullied it. It was nothing much, unless you loved it, in which case it was a kingdom dot as the wagon creaked into the yard. A stray calf bawled from under the chinaberry tree where it had jammed its head in a loop of rope. Clara sighed, stood, looped the lead, over the break, and jumped down. Dust licked up around her ankles. She went straight to the calf, hands practiced, voice dropping to that low patient register animals listen to. "Hush now, foolish prince," she murmured, loosening the knot with fingers that had learned to be nimble because clumsiness cost lives out here. The calf blinked wet eyes and stilled. She freed it and thumped its ribs. It bounded off with the chaotic joy of a creature restored to itself. When she turned back, he was still on the bench, watching. The lines at his mouth had rearranged. It wasn't a smile, but it was as the hawk, as the wind a sign. Clara dusted her hands and reached for the cinch of the halter where it tied to the brake. She didn't look at him while she untied it. "For the moment," she said, "we keep the appearance of things. If someone comes riding, I don't want them carrying tailies to town that I'm soft. It wouldn't make you safer, and it sure wouldn't make me so." She looped the rawhide and tossed it over a peg. She did not touch the irons. Not yet. She met his eyes and spoke like a partner at a table, set with bad cards and a better plan. "You thirsty?" He held her gaze. After a long beat, he gave the same small nod. She pointed with her chin. "Pumps there. Cups on the nail." She started toward the barn. "I've a Mari 2 weeks to foaling. I'll check her." "When?" "You've drunk. Come on." Work waits and doesn't care about anybody's feelings. He slid from the bench. The chains sent a soft metallic whisper over the yard, and Clara flinched at the sound even as she kept walking. The pump handle squealed. Water splashed. She didn't turn to see him drink, but she listened, and the sound cool water, a throat. Working was a benediction she hadn't known she needed. At the barn door, she paused and looked back. He'd braced his palms on the trough and was letting water run over his head, down his face, into his hair. Sun and water and dust made a tiny halo where the drops caught the light before they fell. He looked less like a prisoner in that moment, and more like a man between worlds, neither of which wanted him, both of which might yet fail him. She felt something fold open and steady inside her, the same feeling she'd had the first time. A newborn calf stood trembling on stick legs and shoved its face greedily into milk. "Call him savage all you want," she'd said to the town. She let the memory stand in the door with her like a friend. "I see a man worth saving." Behind her, in the dim of the barn, the Mare shifted and blew warm breath that smelled of clover. Work waited. So did trouble. So did a dozen small mercies. Clara squared her shoulders and stepped into the cool, her voice already gentling for the horse. Out in the sunlight, the man lifted his face from the water and blinked, and for the first time since he'd been dragged to the town's flatbed like a sideshow, he let the weight in his chest ease by the width of a breath. The day had been divided neatly in two before the woman's voice cut through the heat and after. Dawn pushed through the cottonwoods soft as breath. The yard was gray and ordinary again, cattle shapes moving like islands in a slow river, the rafters above the porch full of swallows chittering their gossip. Clara came out with her sleeves already rolled and a mug steaming in her palm. Night had let go of the heat, for now. The relief felt like a favor you didn't ask for, because you didn't trust it would be granted. He was already awake. She found him standing near the corral, watching the east come bright. The irons at his wrists made two pale bands where the skin had been rubbed clean of dust. The chain between them hung slack and quiet, but it was there, the way some sounds continue in your head long after they've stopped. "Morning," she said, because it cost nothing to be decent, and because she wanted the word to start. Belonging to this place again. He glanced at her, and then at the horses. The roan gelding lifted his head and blew. The man made a small, low sound in his throat, a greeting, not to her. The gelding blinked and settled. The horses knew what was useful truth, and what was noise. "Coffee?" she offered. When he didn't answer, she set the mug on the fence rail and tipped her head toward the pump. Water's fresh. He went to it, worked the handle in a steady rhythm, and drank from cupped hands rather than the tin cup. He moved like a man counting measured, nothing wasted. The chain whispered against the pump post. The sound made some old muscle in Clara's jaw tick. "Come on," she said. "We've got a mare likely to foal today who doesn't fancy small rooms or help. She's got her own opinions about both." The mare, a sorrel with a moon-white blaze, had been circling since midnight, pawing, stopping to grumble at fate. She had the look of a woman in labor and done with advice. Clara had checked her by lantern in the dark, the mare's breath moist on her forearm, the foal's hoof pressing briefly against her palm like a knock on a door. Now in daylight, the mare's nostrils flared, eyes rimmed with white. Clara kept, her voice low and ordinary. "All right, girl, you've got this." The man stood outside the stall and watched. He didn't reach. He didn't crowd. He watched the way you watch a creek decide whether it will jump its banks. "Hold her head?" Clara asked. He slid into the stall, slow, visible, the way you approach a horse that doesn't belong to you. He set his hands on the halter, one near the cheek piece, one low, not restraining so much as steadying. The mare blew, ears flicking, and then she leaned her forehead into his chest, like a child tucking into a good shoulder. His stance shifted into the give of it without thought. Clara saw the adjustment the way a smith sees, the exact moment iron quits fighting the hammer. The foal came wrong at first one knee back, a shoulder catching. Clara gritted her teeth, set her hand in her will, and worked, the slick heat of newness under her fingers. "Easy," she said to the mare, and maybe to herself. The man didn't speak, but a note of sound came from him again, low and even, a river tone. The mare listened to that as much as to Clara's words. When the foal slid into the straw, time stopped and then sprinted. Clara cleared its nose and mouth, rubbed the ribs hard through the membrane until the chest heaved. The foal sneezed, shook, and coughed up the world. The mare whickered, soft and astonished, and turned to do the ancient work of cleaning what she'd made. The man stepped back, ducking out of the stall in one backward flow, and stood with his palms against the door jamb, breathing like he'd been holding himself still for a long time. Clara leaned on her knees and laughed once, low and disbelieving, as if every birth were a dare that had again been met. "Another useless mouth to feed," she said, and the mare nosed the foal in protest at the slander. When she straightened, the man was watching her hands. She held one up palm smeared with straw dust and the slick shine of work before she remembered the chain. She wiped her hands on her pants and looked full at the cuffs. The skin underneath was rubbed dark and raw. "Those are in my way," she said. "And yours." He looked at her, and then at the barn's shadowed interior, where tools hung on pegs like obedient soldiers. He didn't speak. She went to the workbench, found the cold chisel and the 3-pound sledge, and set them on the thick plank like a promise. "I didn't ask for a key," she said, "and Hart didn't offer. That's on me." She tapped the link between the cuffs with the chisel. "This, though, I can do something about. Brace your hands on the bench. Hold still when I hit. If I miss, you get to cuss me in any language you like." He considered. She could see the debate happen across his face, quick and private. Pain versus insult. Risk versus what it buys. He set his wrists on the scarred wood, chain running straight, the iron chilled from morning air. He planted his feet wide, not bracing for fight, but for staying. Clara breathed out and set the chisel to the center of the link. She did not look at his hands while she raised the hammer. She looked at where she wanted the metal to fail. The first blow rang the board and jumped up her arms, numbed her teeth. The second blow bruised the link. The third split it, clean as a snapped wishbone. The chain fell with a sound like light, falling into a well. He exhaled. The cuffs still circled his wrists ugly, close, but his hands were his again. He flexed his fingers, slow, checking each tendon as if taking roll. He met her eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The change was a steadiness that replaced something tight inside him. "You'll keep those bands," she said, chin flicking at the cuffs, "for now, until I can get them peened off without taking your hands with them. But you can work." He raised his freed hands and looked at the mare and her foal, at the yard, at the far hills like blue shoulders. When he looked back at Clara, she saw acknowledgement, not gratitude. It was better than thanks. It didn't ask anything extra of either of them. Work took the day by the scruff, then, and set the terms. They went out to the south fence where the posts had leaned like sermons never straightened. Prairie wind had bullied the wire all spring, stretching it until it sagged and sang. Clara hauled a post-hole digger and a coil of barbed wire. He carried, with that same economy, 3 posts at once, muscles setting and releasing like small, intelligent animals under his skin. At the arroyo, coyote prints smudged the dust. He squatted and touched one lightly, not to worship it, not to dramatize, but to take the measurement of it. He pointed at the print, then made 2 fingers walk, then held them slightly apart, then tipped them toward the fence. Clara nodded. "Yeah," she said. "They'll crawl under if we leave that bottom wire loose. Learned that the expensive way." He took the fencing pliers and, without comment, fixed what the coyotes liked. He twisted a splice so clean and tight the wire gleamed like a drawn bow. He showed her a knot she didn't know, quicker, stronger, and then made a second one slow so she could read the moves. She copied and got it wrong and swore mild at herself. He shook his head once and tapped her fingers to correct their order. When she got it right, a small approval touched his eyes. Gone before she could make a foolish big deal of it. They didn't speak much. The rhythm spoke post, wire, staple. The grunt of the pounder driving iron into wood. The breath they took. In unison when a stretch went good. Mid-morning, a dust devil whirled across the pasture like a child running, and he lifted his face as if to greet a cousin. He could read the sky as if it were marked in letters she couldn't see. When the light changed thin high cloud like rippled glass, he glanced west and then at the shingles of the house. Clara filed the glance away. She didn't have to ask to know. He was adding roofs and wind to the ledger. Near noon, on the walk. Back to the yard for water, the dog barked and then shut off like a lamp. Silence fell the wrong way. It landed heavy. The hair rose along Clara's forearms. The man had already stopped, head turned. A sound came then, dry music, small and decisive. "Rattler," Clara said. "Under the porch steps coils." The snake's head lifted and froze. Tongue tasting the world, the dog's smell. Their heat. She reached for the shovel by the woodpile. He reached faster, not at her, but at the long forked branch propped against the cabin wall where she'd left it after moving brush weeks ago. He slid it under the snake's head with no flourish, just speed that respected risk. He pinned the diamond skull to the dirt, and with a single quick practiced turn, lifted. The body coiled the branch in. Outraged knots. He carried the whole furious length away from the house and set it down. One neat blow with the shovel. The music stopped. He picked up the rattle and the skinning knife that lived in his belt and set about his work cleanly. No set of show. Clara watched, not squeamish, but attentive. When he finished, he brought the rattle back to the porch, lifted it to her level offering, not tribute. "Keep it," she said. "Hang it by the door. Better warning than most men I've hired." He made a small sound that might have been humor. It was as close to a laugh as either of them had managed this long morning. They ate on the porch steps beans. warmed in a skillet, a heel of bread, a hunk of jerky tougher than boot leather unless you worked it. He ate with the same measure he did everything else, not looking around as if anyone might take his portion away, not gulping like a man without tomorrow. When she poured coffee for herself, he shook his head, then nodded toward the pump. She brought him water without comment. After, he rose and took the broom and swept the porch, as if it offended him personally that snakes could hide under furniture. It took Clara a second to understand the courtesy for what it was. She hadn't expected it. She leaned a shoulder against the doorpost and let herself feel briefly how good it was to have someone see the thousand small things a place needed. In the afternoon, they took to the small corral where a bay colt had been making trouble by the simple fact of being young and full of ideas. Clara had started him late, alone, because the help hadn't lasted. He'd learned all the wrong lessons: how to lean on a bit, how to push a shoulder through a gate, how to shake a saddle loose just by believing hard enough that he could. "Don't get yourself killed," she said, handing the man the lead. It came out as a joke and as a prayer. He didn't mount. He stepped into the round pen and let the colt move. He didn't chase him, he suggested. A lift of the hand sent the colt out. A turn of the body said, "And now the other way." He reduced choices until the horse found the one he'd wanted all along: to stop, to breathe, to give. It was not magic. It was attention as discipline. When the colt lit and dropped his head to think, the man stepped in and set a palm lightly on the sweet spot where neck becomes shoulder. There, agreement. He slid the saddle on and let the colt feel it. The first crow hop was half-hearted, more tradition than malice. The second didn't happen. The man's hand stayed steady on the rein, low, unconcerned. When he swung up, he did it in one easy line, like lifting a bucket you know your arm can handle. Clara, who had fought that colt for 3 evenings and had the bruises like a family tree to show for it, watched the animal quit his argument because no fight had been offered. The man rode, and the colt learned going forward. By late light, sweat shone on both of them. The colt's sides worked. The man slid down and loosened the cinch, and didn't walk away until the horse had learned that hands also meant rest. He stood a long moment with his forearm across the colt's neck, eyes closed as if listening to something in there that spoke quieter than words. Clara brought him a tin cup of water and, without crowding the quiet, handed it into his free hand. He drank and splashed the last of it along the colt's shoulder. The horse flicked an ear and dozed. They put the animals up and checked the paddock gate again and stowed the tools. The sun folded itself into the western hills, the good light. That makes ugly things look forgiven, lingering over the broken boards of the barn and the patched places on the roof. Clara's shoulders ached in the honest way that counted done, not damaged. The yard smelled of hay and iron and the clean sharpness of the snake skin, curing under the eave at the cook stove. She set beans to simmer again, the eternal pot, sliced what little bacon she had, and mixed cornmeal with hot water to slap into the skillet. A man sat on the step outside where darkness collected. She could see him through the open door, his shape against the last mild blue. He took out something from the folds of his shirt, a short curved sliver of wood and a small knife. He began to work it, the way men work after work when they're not allowed to be idle by their own thoughts. Shavings fell like curled fingernails. He turned the wood, tested its bend, shaved again. He wasn't whittling for decoration. He was making a thing that would have a purpose, though Clara couldn't yet see what it would be. It felt like watching a plan get born. She brought him a plate. He nodded, not up, but in, like a man writing the word yes with his spine. They ate with their backs to the doorpost, both of them facing the yard. Evening wind brought the small sounds: closer crickets practicing, a cow complaining that the day had been too long. The sky went lavender, then bruised, then surrendered to stars. She spoke first, because it felt right to put something softer than instructions between them before the dark shut the day. "You have people in the hills?" she asked. She kept. Her voice like a hand left open no trap, no demand. "I don't mean to know what you won't tell. I mean, should I expect someone to come looking?" He chewed, swallowed, set the plate aside. For a long time, the only answer was the knife against wood, the careful, even stroke. When he did speak, it was one word. "Far," she nodded. Far could be distance. Far could be time. Far could mean not coming back. She accepted all the meanings, because the day had earned that. "My name is Clara," she said after a while, still looking at the yard where the foal now lay like a fallen star against its mother's belly. "Folks in town will call me Mrs. Dawson to my face, and that, damned woman to my back. On this place, Clara will do. You can say it or not." He turned the small piece of wood in his hands. It had taken a shape now part of a curve that might belong to a bow or to something lighter meant for a hand. He polished the edge with his thumb, feeling for snags. He didn't look at her when he answered. "I hear." It was enough. She didn't press. He finished eating, set the tin plate near the door, and wiped the knife clean on a folded piece of leather. Then, as if something had settled inside him during the food and the dark, he set the wood aside with precision. A promise. To return to it, and spoke again. "My people call me Taiyan." He said it simply. He gave it like a tool you could use, not like a secret you had to guard. Clara rolled the name in her mouth once. "Taiyan," she said, careful, respectful. She didn't ask what it meant. It meant him. That would do. He looked up then and met her eyes. Whatever had been held back all day, the last small piece that meant, "I will see you as you are, if you will do the same," clicked into place. Not trust, not yet. But the hinge had been oiled. "Good," she said. The word came warm despite herself. "All right, Taiyan. Tomorrow we'll pull the debris from the creek and make the north pasture gate hold like it should. I'll need your eyes on the windmill, too. She's listing, and I don't fancy climbing her alone." He nodded. His gaze tipped to the black slice of hills. For a heartbeat, his face was open and young and grieving. And then the door shut, and he was simply a man at a stranger's ranch at the end of a long day, with his hands free enough to work, and his name returned to him. Clara stood. Her knees cracked in the precise rude way that reminded her she'd been doing this work too long without help. She picked up the plates and the empty skillet and paused in the doorway. "You can sleep in the tack room tonight," she said. "It's dry and it doesn't leak unless the rain comes sideways. Tomorrow we'll sort out something better." He stood too. He didn't thank her. He didn't have to. He took the rolled blanket she sat on the bench without touching her. Fingers. He stepped out into the yard, and then, before he vanished into the barn shadow, he turned back and touched the doorframe with the tips of his fingers. It was so brief she might have missed it. A greeting. A compact with the place, not with her. It made sense, after she swept the stove and banked the coals and blew out the lamp. Clara lay on her narrow bed and let the sounds find her. The soft chew of the mower, the snore of the dog that had forgiven the morning's fright, the new note of something breathing in the tack room steady, human. It put a weight over the yard that meant held. She did not have to like that she could not name why the weight eased her. She accepted the sleep it brought. Outside, the snakeskin dried to parchment. The rattles ticked once in a thin wind, and then were still. The half-carved piece of wood lay on the porch like a comma at the end of a sentence they would finish. Later, somewhere past the cottonwoods, coyotes sang the late service. Taiyan lay on his back and looked at the slice of stars through the tack room's loose boards. A word in his own language rose in him and went out like a breath. Not a prayer, a reminder. The sound folded into the structure of the barn like a nail, you know, won't work free. Morning would come and lay its work out on the table between them. Tonight had done its part. He had a name here again, and hands enough to use it. And for now, that was the measure. The summer dusk came red and swollen, heavy with the smell of dust and dry grass. Heat had baked the boards of the Dawson house until they gave off their own ghost of warmth, and even the cicadas rasped slower than usual. Clara had been out all day fencing, watering, hauling salt blocks to the east pasture. Her shirt clung damp at the small of her back. Her braid was thick with dust. She poured the last bucket into the trough, leaned on the handle, and let herself think just for a blink that the evening might bring peace. The dog lifted its head from under the porch and growled. Tahen was already turning, his shoulders tense. He had been mending tack at the bench, the unfinished bow slat resting across his knees. His eyes narrowed toward the ridge where the sunset bled over the hills. He didn't speak, but Clara knew what he saw. Riders. Dust rising in a low cloud, too heavy for cattle, too deliberate for neighbors. The Granger boys. Clara felt the name settle into her stomach like a stone. She'd known it would come to this sooner or later. You didn't embarrass men like the Grangers in public, not in a town where cruelty passed for law. She remembered the sneer on Wade Granger's face outside the sheriff's office, his words slick with threat. For now it arrived. The riders, they came 6 strong, their silhouettes sharp against the bruising sky. Spurs jingled, rifles gleamed. Their laughter carried on the dry air, harsh as crow calls. They weren't drunk, not the sloppy kind, but mean drunk, sharp drunk, the sort that enjoyed cruelty clear-headed. The lead horse stepped into Clara's yard like it was already claimed. Wade Granger sat the saddle with his black vest flapping. Open, a cigar clamped in his teeth. His grin was all teeth, no humor. "Evenin', Widow Dawson," he drawled, tipping his hat mockingly. "Heard you bought yourself some savage help. Thought we'd ride out, see how that's working for you." The other men chuckled. One spat tobacco juice onto her porch rail. Another swung his rifle lazily toward the corral, where the foal stood close to its dam. Ears pricked at the strangers. Clara wiped her palms against her pants and stepped forward, rifle already in her hands. She hadn't aimed it yet, but the barrel gleamed in the failing light. "Turn around, Wade. You've had your fun. My land isn't your saloon." The laughter sharpened. Wade eased his cigar out, tapped ash onto her dirt yard. "I like a woman with grit," he said. "Shame about your choices. You bring a Comanche dog onto Dawson land, you're begging for trouble. We're here to oblige." At his side, Tayen had not moved. He stood silent, eyes on the riders, his hand resting lightly on the haft of the unfinished bow, as if it were already a weapon. He was bareheaded, dust in his hair, sweat streaking his temples, but his stillness drew every eye like fire draws night moths. One outlaw pointed at him. "Hell, Wade, let's just string him up right here. Do the town a favor." "Not yet," Wade said, teeth flashing. "I want the widow to watch him beg first." Fire and iron it happened fast. A match struck. Clara smelled smoke before she saw the flame. One of the men had tossed a torch into the haystack by the barn. The dry straw caught with a roar. Fire licked skyward, red tongues against the twilight. The cattle bawled, milling in panic. The foal bolted, rope tangling around its legs. The mare screamed and reared. Sparks shot into the dark like wicked stars. Clara raised her rifle and fired. The shot cracked, echoing across the valley. One outlaw yelped as his hat flew, shredded by the bullet. The others cursed, spurred their mounts. Gunfire barked in answer, spitting dirt at her feet, punching holes in the porch rail. Taa moved like a shadow cut loose. He sprinted past Clara. Before she could shout, bare feet kicking dust, a length of rawhide in his hands. He vaulted the fence, grabbed the foal's halter, cut the rope with one hard draw of his knife. The animal stumbled free. He slapped its flank, sent it running toward the far pasture. Bullets hissed past him, thudding into fence posts. He dropped low, rolled, came up with Clara's spare rifle from where it leaned by the shed. He didn't fire wild. He took a knee, steadied, and sent a shot cracking the air. One rider's rifle spun out of his grip. The outlaw howled, clutching his hand. The barn blazed higher, smoke thick. Sparks whirled toward the house roof. Clara cursed under her breath, fired again, chambered another round. Her shoulder throbbed where the stock slammed back, but she ignored it. A rider toppled sideways, horse screaming, the man's boot caught in the stirrup as the animal bolted. Fall back. One outlaw shouted, "She's crazy." But Wade Granger didn't retreat. His face was red in the firelight, twisted with rage. He dismounted slow, deliberate, shotgun in his hands. He stepped into the yard, the flames painting him devil red. "You're dead, Dawson," he spat. "You and your Indian both." Stand in the yard. Clara braced her rifle, but Wade swung his shotgun faster, the muzzle leveled at her chest. Time froze, the air hot and trembling. A blur. Tayon hit her shoulder first, driving her to the dirt. The shotgun roared, fire searing the night. Buckshot ripped the porch beam where Clara had been standing. Splinters rained. Tahan rolled, came up inside Wade's guard, slammed the shotgun aside. The two men locked, muscle against muscle, dirt grinding under their boots. Wade snarled, swung a fist, caught Tahan across the cheek. Blood spattered. Tahan didn't falter. He drove his elbow into Wade's gut, wrenched the shotgun free, and smashed the butt into Wade's jaw. The outlaw leader crumpled, groaning in the dirt. Smoke roared in their ears. The barn was collapsing, beams groaning, sparks rising like a funeral pyre. The other riders cursed, firing wild shots, then broke, wheeling their horses away. The sound of hooves thundered into the distance until only the crackle of fire and the panicked lowing of cattle remained. Clara staggered to her feet, breath ragged, rifle still clutched. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood trickling where a grazing bullet had burned her skin. She looked at Tahan. He was standing over Wade Granger's limp body, chest heaving, smoke curling around him like war paint. "Why?" she gasped, voice raw. "Why risk yourself for me?" He turned his head, eyes black and bright in the firelight. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, low and certain, "Because you did not let them break me." The ashes the barn burned too. Its bones that night. Clara and Tayon fought it with buckets from the creek, coughing, hacking, eyes streaming, until the roof collapsed inward with a crash that shook the earth. They saved the house, saved most of the stock, but the barn was gone, reduced to black timbers glowing in the night, like the ribs of some fallen beast. Clara sank onto the porch steps, sweat and ash streaking her face. Her shoulder throbbed, the cut shallow but stinging. Her hands shook so badly she could hardly reload her rifle. She looked out at the smoldering ruin and then at the man who stood silent in the yard, shotgun still in his hand, blood running from his split lip. Granger's would come again. She knew it. Tonight had been a warning. Next time it would be Wargot, but for the first time since the fever had taken her husband, Clara felt she was not alone. She wiped the ash from her mouth and met Tahan's eyes. The fire still reflected there, but so did something else. A promise, unspoken, that the fight wasn't over and neither of them would face it alone. The next days smelled of smoke and scorched earth. Black ribs of the barn jutted skyward, charred and hollow, and Clara could not step outside without feeling the loss grind in her chest. She had stacked lumber, patched what she could, penned cattle tighter to keep them from wandering, but every chore carried the reminder. The Granger boys had not finished. Tayan worked without complaint. He rebuilt fences, split rails, hauled water, all with the silent steadiness that had become as sure as sunrise. The cut on his lip had crusted into a dark line, his cheek still swollen from Wade Granger's fist, but he never winced. When Clara caught him by the pump in the evenings, splashing his face, she sometimes wondered if he worked himself harder than necessary to keep from remembering. The sheriff came once, days later, with Deputy Creed at his back. They stared at the ashes, at Wade's bruised face still painted in rumor around town, and Sheriff Hart cleared his throat. "Trouble finds you easy, Mrs. Dawson." Clara stood tall, despite her bandaged shoulder. Trouble rode in wearing spurs and carrying fire. "You want to blame someone, Sheriff. Look to Wade Granger." Hart shifted, color rising. Creed spat in the dust and muttered, "Folks don't like you keeping a savage." Clara's jaw set. She almost spat back, but Tahan stepped into view from behind the corral, carrying a length of timber balanced across one shoulder. He paused, gaze calm and unreadable, and Creed shut his mouth. The sheriff left with promises of looking into it. Clara knew better. Silver Gulch's law bent to the Grangers. They'd be back. Storm on the horizon. The valley grew restless. Neighbors stopped riding by. The preacher's wife crossed the street when Clara came to town. A few whispered sympathy, but more whispered condemnation. She heard the word savage more times than she could count. Still, Clara felt something had shifted. When she worked beside Tayan, when their silence filled with the scrape of tools and the hum of wind, she caught herself glancing his way, not to make sure he stayed, but to know she wasn't standing alone anymore. One evening, she found him by the porch, shaping the slat of wood he had carried since that first day. Now it was unmistakably a bow, polished smooth, sinew string glistening taut. He held it with reverence, tested the draw, then nodded as though confirming something only he could hear. "They'll come again," Clara said quietly, setting down the lantern she carried. He did not answer, but his gaze went to the hills, where a red sunset sank like smoldering iron. The return it came sooner than she feared. 2 nights later, hoofbeats thundered down the valley. The dog barked, then whimpered and went silent. Clara snatched her rifle, heart hammering. Tayan was already at her side, bow strung, a quiver of rough-cut arrows slung across his back. The Granger boys rode with lanterns swinging, voices hoarse with liquor and rage. Wade himself was at the front, jaw bruised but grin intact, shotgun raised. "Light it all," he shouted. "Burn the witch out with a red-skinned dog." Torches arced into the yard. One landed in the hay by the porch, flames catching fast. Another rolled toward the fence, sparks leaping. Clara fired. One rider screamed and fell, horse bolting. Tayan loosed an arrow that whistled into the dark thunk. Another man toppled from his saddle, clutching his throat. The yard exploded into chaos. Horses screamed, cattle bellowed, the foal shrieked as sparks singed its hide. Clara reloaded, fired, reloaded again, hands steady despite the tremor in her blood. A bullet tore past her ear. Another splintered the porch rail. Tha and moved like water, silent and precise. His arrows flew swift, each one finding a mark. He ducked low when a rider swung at him with a saber, rolled beneath the horse, came up behind, and drove the blade of his knife into the outlaw's thigh. The man howled, toppled. But Wade kept coming. He dismounted, shotgun in one hand, torch in the other, striding through smoke and fire like a devil. "You should have sold, Clara," he roared. "Now you both die. Last stand in the yard, Clarice." Rifle clicked empty. She fumbled for cartridges, but the box had fallen somewhere in the dirt. Wade leveled the shotgun at her chest, grinning wide. A hiss, a whistle. Tahan's arrow struck first. It sank deep into Wade's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The shotgun fired wild, shot tearing into the dirt at Clara's feet. Wade screamed, dropped the torch, but staggered up again, rage stronger than pain. He raised the gun one last time, and Clara's hands were already on her pistol. She fired once. Wade Granger crumpled, his gun falling silent, smoke curling from the muzzle like a dying snake. The yard stilled. The surviving riders wheeled their horses, curses scattering into the hip. Night as they fled. The fire guttered low where torches had landed, smothered under dirt. Only the hiss of embers and the harsh sound of breathing remained. Aftermath. Clara lowered the pistol, her arms trembling now that it was over. Smoke stung her eyes, and she coughed, sinking against the porch rail. Her shoulder bled anew, the old wound torn open. Tayan stepped close, bow still in hand, face streaked with sweat and ash. He crouched, studied her wound, then tore a strip from his own shirt and bound it firm. His touch was steady, gentle in a way that surprised her. "They called you savage," Clara whispered hoarsely. She looked at him, really looked his strength, his silence, his refusal to break, even when the whole town tried. "But all I see is a man worth saving." For the first time since she had met him, his eyes softened. His hand lingered at her arm, not in possession, but in acknowledgement. A silent vow exchanged without words. The flames died down. The cattle quieted. Above them, the stars returned, unshaken. Silver Gulch would whisper of that night for years. The widow who defied the Grangers, the Comanche who stood by her side. But on that scorched yard, in the hush after blood and dust, Clara and Tahan knew only this.